Okay. Yeah.
Basically, over the last 10 years, so I wrote the original business case for Treasury for standard business reporting. Don't hold that against me. Unfortunately, they varied it quite significantly after we wrote it. Quite recently I actually start a 6 weeks secondment to ASIC next week where we're doing their first machine learning piece around interpretation of financials. So we're actually doing an interpretation piece on 5,000 sets of financial statements. Now, we generally can't find two auditors to agree. So it's going to be a really interesting project to work through. In between, you've got a whole heap of projects ranging from single touch payroll where for the first time ever, the government is actually getting smarter than we are as advisors, better data and quicker. So it's a brave new world.
I'm sceptical of the government ever being smarter, as people in the earlier sessions will have heard. You're confident of that, though?
Yeah, interpretation, I guess, and availability of data are two different things. But we're already seeing the outcomes of some of the pilots. So 50,000 tax returns were lodged this year via text message. Single touch payroll is looking to eliminate roughly 3 million returns from the economy. You start then looking at real time, dealing with issues in real time. So if there's a super payment issue, that's actually being moved back now to the employer to resolve, not the ATO, through people checking their own MyGov account. So the whole way they're dealing with data is about dealing with issues in real time. Once they sort out the patterns of their data, that's when I think they'll start trying to do some smart things with it.
Yeah, very good. And we'll come back to STP, because I saw even in the previous panel there are a few questions about that. I'll introduce Anthony now. Now, it's very important to know that Anthony is from the third biggest metropolis in Tasmania. That's correct?
That's spot on. Yep.
Spot on. Excellent. And he was introduced to me by my colleague Phil, who worked with him in the partner space. And he said, at Crowe Horwath, which is a national accounting firm, you are the tech guru. Is that right?
I think that's a bit of a stretch.
Okay. It's unlike Phil to stretch the truth.
I know Phil pretty well, and I can't agree there.
So just from, Jason touched on the government side, but what in your role as an accountant, I guess, you're looking at that in that software space. What are you seeing is happening in the business space and technology moving to AI, that sort of area?
I think it's predominantly around automation and the collection of data in a more timely manner. It's similar to what the government's trying to do. It's all about capturing the data as soon as we can, so we can interpret it. And that's the goal that we're all aiming for, I think. Well,
so does this mean that if we've got machines to capture all the data, what does that mean for accountants? Like, does that make accountants, bookkeepers, are they redundant then?
No, not by any means. So we've got the data there immediately. It changes the relationship we have with our clients. We can talk to them about what's happening now, rather than the traditional model where we've done financial statements up to 10, 12 months behind, and looking in the past, where all of a sudden we're looking at the here and now, and we're becoming the interpreters of that data and the advisors in real time.
I joke with my fellow partners that we come in 9 months after the war's over and bayonet the wounded.
Yep.
By basically going through a form filling exercise, and unfortunately we've trained a generation of accountants in the compliance space that are very good at filling out forms. We now have to retrain them on how to actually take that business data and get comfortable in having real-time business discussions. And that journey's already started.
Yeah, it's all about the relationships with the clients. In my mind, we've got to build and hold relationships with our clients and help them understand what that information that we're now collecting for them tells them.
So I haven't introduced Rebecca as yet, but I should. Rebecca's from Xero, and her role, correct me if I'm wrong again here, is to work with partners in that transition that we're talking about from paper to the cloud, and Xero's been very successful at this. They've taken them from 60,000 to 5 million, I was reading, people using that. Is that true? Have I exaggerated again there?
No, you're pretty much on par there. So very happy to be involved in the transition from moving to general compliance and all of the data entry and the number crunching that we see accountants commonly doing, to really becoming the storyteller, looking into the data, taking the data and making something of it. The advice piece will become the most important part of where the machines stop and where the humans start. And I think that these guys in their accounting firms are probably finding that new grads coming through are having to learn different skills that they were 10, 15 years ago. It's not so much about learning how the software operates or the tax compliance. It's all of those additional things like EQ and CQ. So how do they actually bring that emotional and creative energy into the way that they work with customers?
Two things that accountants are really known for: emotional intelligence and creativity. Absolutely. No, I can see that. So what I'm hearing from you guys here is that a lot of these tasks are going to be automated. Now, there's a mixture of people in the audience. Some of them are accountants or work in payroll. There's a few. And then there's others who are clients who have accountants. So everyone can relate to this question. How does that affect your revenue? If machines are now doing all the work, surely your revenue declines and my accounting bill goes down. Is that right?
I think it's going to change, and part of it's going to come back to that relationship with the client. I've actually got clients where we're more hands-on with the data, we're doing more real-time, and the fee's actually gone up, but they're getting value. Previously, I'm doing a BAS, I'm doing a tax return, you're chasing them for the data, it's late, and they begrudge paying that. They don't see value in compliance. So when you sort of look at this digital roadmap that the government's got, by dealing with compliance in real time, they are taking that grudge work away from us. But it means we can actually add more value. When you add value, you don't have issue with the fees.
Yeah, you're just in front of the clients more. It's simple as that. The money they're spending for work they didn't see and that didn't value, all of a sudden has disappeared. So they can invest that money with time with us or with another advisor in the business. Seeing stuff for what they're paying for.
And once they know you've got the data, they get a lot more confident with picking up the phone with a lot more random questions about the running of their business. I've never given so much advice by text message as I have in the last 12 months. Putting it on file is interesting, but where you'll get a text message from a client saying, I'm looking at doing this or I'm thinking about doing this. So they're actually engaging because they know you can answer the question. Historically, where we didn't have the data, we couldn't do that.
I like that because I think one of the things I find in the advisors that I work with is their role is actually almost working in the business, closer with the business owners to make those big decisions. Do they hire another employee? Do they move to a bigger premises? Do they start operating overseas? It's actually that advice piece that I know these guys on the stage might not be normal accountants, but that's the stuff we love. We really have a really passion for taking those opportunities and making something of it, not actually sitting in the background doing your tax compliance returns. I know that's why I got out of accounting.
And don't get me wrong, we've got people in the practice who absolutely love tax and doing tax advice, and I'm absolutely more than happy for them to go at it. Where that piece is changing is, and we're seeing it now, we're seeing the ATO send through information on a property sale. They suspect there's been a business sale, but they're sending it through in real time, trying to deal with it before year end. We know that it costs 6 times less to deal with it in real time than it does to deal with it after the event. You start to take that piece out, you're relying on the true advice from the expert, take away that form filling piece, and there's an opportunity for us to completely reimagine our practices.
I think even just the advent of Xero as a software platform, not giving you a plug here, but has changed the client's view of it as well. You know, no longer they just plug away at a bank rec, and then we've got to deal with it, whatever hasn't been left unreconciled at the end of the year or is out of balance. They actually will ring you or text you and say, hey, what do I do with this transaction? Because it's just encouraging them, that behaviour. So we're able to deal with it, even that they're initiating that discussion.
Yeah. Even further back, where we've actually seen a rapid growth in the bookkeeping side of our business, where we're actually getting hands-on in the transaction piece.
Yeah, and I think that's a growth space for the accounting industry, just grabbing that transactional data still and analysing it. So
what is the first step that businesses or clients are making? So there's a lot of people, in Tanda we see a lot of people coming off paper onto digital timesheets. What is the first step that businesses tend to make, and can you talk us through some of the struggle pieces in bringing businesses along that cloud journey? What are your experiences there?
Just getting off the desktop accounting software to start with.
Yeah. Change is painful no matter how small or large.
But I think from there, then automating their collection of their supplier invoices in expenses and stuff. That's usually the second step that you can sort of automate with clients, getting them away from the need to enter all that data.
And how do you deal with someone resisting that?
My big one is culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I like that.
It's about getting to the heart of the change and how that dives into the culture. That's the best way to break a barrier.
And so in terms of the softwares that people are using, obviously lots of people in this room are using Tanda and Xero, two excellent examples of software, but what other things are on the cutting edge and exciting and in the automation and AI space that you're seeing?
Look, it probably depends what industry you're in and what size of business, but one of my clients was actually one of the first adopters of Retail Express. So I think he was their second ever client. He had 2 stores. He'll open his 75th store sometime between now and the end of September. Just that move to cloud, whereas his previous iteration was MYOB, and the issues we had with that. Depends on the business, depends on the size. I mean, it's everything from Counter to Vend to Unleashed. There are some great cloud products out there for some really niche businesses that really drive value.
Yeah, pretty much the same sort of idea. A lot of job management systems that are allowing clients to see actually what's going on day to day in the business, particularly around the trades. They can capture anything from photos on site to payments on site before they leave. Even just down to the little things like getting a GPS location for when a guy turns up to a location and leaves again. Just covers off on so much angst that can be created with a customer, because often they'll be faced with, I don't think he arrived on site at 10 o'clock. Well, here's the GPS location. He was there. That's created a lot of improvements to customer relationships with some of my clients.
And you're right, part of it's the data and part of it's the timing. That time delay between when you get the data and when you have actually got something you can use to make an answer, you can do a lot of damage in that delay. I had the misfortune of being seconded to one of the big 4 banks for 9 months around a franchise group where it took them roughly 28 days to close month end. By the time we'd gone that extra 28 days, they'd lost the better part of another $1 million. That's a big mistake to keep making month after month after month. And that was all about just not having the right data with the right people to make decisions.
Yeah, I think it also reduces your business cycle, because with the job management systems, you can actually have the team in the office actually invoicing jobs once they're closed off at the site. So no longer you have to wait for the tech to come in, hand all the paperwork over, give you the rundown of the diagnostics, and then someone raise the actual invoice.
So we get paid sooner, which everyone likes getting paid sooner, right? And I think compared to some of the compliance costs that you're talking about there, subscription fees for SaaS software like $10 per employee per month seems quite cheap. I want to remind people to lodge. I can see some people already lodging questions via the app. We will have time to take questions from the audience, but I do want to touch on STP because it's been such a long journey for everyone that's been involved. And I noticed in the panel before, one of the questions was, how can we be 100% sure that any of these systems that we're using is going to be compliant on July 1, given the goalposts keep changing all the time?
I saw about 4 goalpost changes yesterday alone. So I actually worked on the STP investigation component, was at Parliament House in November where they're talking about the next 4 phases. So this was just phase 1 of 5. I've done the same presentation 22 times to customers and clients and not won a single piece of consulting revenue out of it. It's part of the new paradigm with the ATO where there's opportunities for software providers, not necessarily for traditional accountants. In the small business end, in a year's time, there might be. They've actually done the rollout from a training point of view reasonably well, to the extent they had the information. The challenge we all have now is as they go live, we lodged our first one yesterday, had 4 issues straight up. And unfortunately, I think we're going to all go on the journey with the ATO, and it's 2 pieces. It's the specs and the software. The other thing is they're using us to clean up their database. So I don't know whether people have seen it hidden in the detail, but we've got to make sure names and addresses are right. Because the ATO want to make sure that they've got the right names and addresses for everybody on file, and it's a massive issue. Now, what I can't figure out is that going to reject the file and cause us a whole bunch of issues, like some other systems do. Unfortunately, we don't have guidance yet on how some of the systems are going to work.
So I'm interested every time I hear you talk about STP, Jason. I feel like I'm living through Orwellian 1984. How long is it before the ATO knows, exactly what I'm doing before I even know what I'm doing?
So part of what you look at is where single touch payroll and why it's come in the way it has. So part of it is around making sure we're capturing those PAYG and super obligations. The super matching through MyGov is only a fairly recent addition in the overall plan. But again, it's all about giving the employee all the information they need, and the employee is actually going to become the ATO's policeman. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that piece evolves in terms of the payment matching. My concern is the devil in the detail. The client that's not taxing an allowance properly, where we haven't looked at that, we've just made sure that the payment summaries have signed off, and we start getting letters from July. Does that upset the client relationship? What policy decisions are they going to make around how they manage all of that? So that's the part I'm waiting to see, and the part they've been very quiet on. They've backed down from a lot of the rhetoric around the fines, the penalties. A lot of the software providers aren't ready. So I think this first year is going to be a pretty soft landing, to be honest.
I'd be interested in your thoughts, Rebecca, because I think, as a payroll solution or accounting solution, how have you found dealing with those moving goalposts, and what confidence can you give your clients around that?
Yeah, look, I think the hardest thing any time the ATO goes about a compliance change, it starts off really light touch. We were actually talking about single touch payroll 5 years ago before I started at Xero and was in my own practice. So the conversation has been there in the background, and it's probably only been the last 9 months that the general business community has been getting all the information they need in their hot little hands to actually digest the information. So for us, the biggest thing is obviously the ATO compliance, having the software compliant, and then being able to support the customer journey to make it really simple. And you are right, we are holding back a little bit because we're not sure if the ATO is ready. For us, if we were to turn single touch payroll on the 1st of July, we could have 140,000 people lodging in one day. I can imagine that the ATO might not be able to support that type of volume. So for us, it's keeping an open mind and measuring as the outflows to the ATO actually come out of the software. And then, of course, supporting in the next 12 months those businesses that are a bit smaller, under the 20 employee range, as to how this is going to change their business. Kind of like when GST was first brought in, really digital form of record was the way to go. STP will mean cloud form of record will be the one and only way to go.
I've been surprised at the number of people who've actually said to me, this thing's going to fail, it's not going to work, it'll go away. I can assure you, it is too big to fail. It will not go away. I can absolutely promise you that. If you look at what they're looking to use that data around, stopping Centrelink fraud, around matching entitlements for pensions and so on, the benefit to the economy far outweighs the cost. They did lie to you when they said there was a benefit for business. I actually have said that in all 22 of my presentations. I've been quite open about it. If you're saving massive amount of times with payment summaries and the annual summary at year end, we probably need to talk about your reconciliation process, because that's really the only two things they've thrown out there. This is about whole of economy benefit, and I think we're all going to be in for a bit of a ride.
So we've heard a bit there about, like, there's a lot of costs that have come through STP, and I think if you're a business owner at the moment, you're thinking that a lot of this is actually the government imposing more criteria on you and making business harder. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel for business operators?
Yeah, I think part of this sort of new form of compliance when we're heading around real-time digital data is by dealing with the issues in real time, you actually do reduce the overall cost in the long term because you get it right earlier. If I look at some of the jobs that come across my desk, I might have to go back and sort out 2 or 3 years worth of super. It's been calculated incorrectly. They're now looking at picking that up in real time and querying it in near real time. Now, what their definition of near real time is, we'll test in the next couple of months. But you're not going to get years down the track. At the moment, it's roughly 8 BASs go unlodged before the ATO figure out you're not lodging anymore. Out of 3.2 million taxpayers, there's 900,000 payment plans in place. When you start working backwards about how many of those are probably not paying super and what the benefit to the economy is and picking that up in real time, in a lot of cases you actually stop that business from failing, believe it or not, rather than letting them drag it out. So what's going to be interesting is the policy decisions they make now with the data that they're collecting.
No, and I think when you were talking before about the ATO training process and materials online, I know you were saying that they were very good to me beforehand, and Jason knows this because one night, just for fun, he went home and he spent 2 hours watching all of the ATO training videos. So Rebecca said there's something about normal accountants before. I don't think there's any such thing, and Jason's proof. I'm going to move into a couple of the questions from the audience now, and this one, what can Xero, or your payroll provider, do to further reduce bookkeeper intervention? Queries from bookkeeper to business owners are a time-consuming issue, and they usually relate to expenses where there's no invoice visible and the bookkeeper can't identify what there is. Can you create a query list in Xero to be set periodically to the business owner? And I think more broadly, are there other solutions in that space, maybe in add-ons that you've seen that help alleviate that?
Yeah, so obviously in the case of Xero, we do currently have a discuss feature which sits inside the bank reconciliation screen. This is a communication method on a transaction by transaction basis as they come through the bank feed. However, we are always looking to step up how we do things, and you might see us sending messages through on the top right-hand side as to updates that are happening. Single touch payroll being one of them would have come through to you yesterday. This will hopefully one day become an engine whereby you can actually communicate with both internal and external parties within the Xero file. So it will become almost like Slack inside Xero so that you can actually have that communication platform. If you're in the audience and you're an advisor, you're on our Xero HQ platform. You also now have access to a new feature called Xero Ask. I highly recommend looking at that. It is designed for template queries. It is a common checklist that can be sent out with 10 questions or attach this, etc., etc. And you can find me at the end if you want to find some more information about that. I'm not sure if these guys are using that yet.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask Anthony, are there any add-ons that you've seen in that space that people are using, or is there anything that your clients are doing to alleviate those sorts of issues?
Not those particular issues.
Not.
I think it's really just training the clients to be, more proactive. And as I said before, that Xero enables that. They're asking questions sooner, and when you can ask answers sooner, you've got more recall. So it's much easier to deal with.
Someone's taken a quote of yours, Jason. Employees, as recipients of super, will become the police. Do we really expect consumers of the data to understand what they are meant to do with the data? And do you foresee a large constraint on payroll teams to become advisors?
It's a good question. I've got to admit, I was probably one of the people who actually voted against putting the payment matching in MyGov straight up. I'd like to have actually seen them do 6 months of the matching to see how big the problem was before we let it loose on the public. But if you actually look at all of the webinars online and all the guidance now, basically the staff will be able to log in, see what super contribution you've promised for the quarter, and then see when it's actually paid. And I just know from experience, there are staff who check their super account. If it's now even easier for them to check MyGov, the first person they're going to come back and check with is the payroll department. And that's, unfortunately, it's just reality. So I'm hoping that this data matching is as near real time as they're promising, and we don't cause ourselves a lot of headaches.
I think there's also just the understanding of how the actual system works. If you think about a lot of employers pay their super before the end of June, so in that quarter there may not be a payment matching up at the same time. So if an employee looks at that, they're confused. Well, hang on a minute, where's my quarterly payment for June? Well, it was made in June, but they don't understand that and why they've done that. So this whole host of questions can come up just because there's the lack of understanding of the system, but they've been given the information.
And I hate to say that I know this from experience, but there is actually quite a good document to give to staff about what they need to know, and a short webinar that you can send them a link to. And I'm quite embarrassed to admit that I know that and I've been right through it.
And so these sort of things that we're talking about gives us an insight into what the regulators are thinking about in the future. Do you have any thoughts on what compliance looks like in the future? I know you were telling me a story, Jason, about the way they're using voice recognition technology, and I think that, again, scary to know what they're doing, or maybe it's good.
So the ATO's got roughly 3.5 million voice prints on file for Australians, recognised back to your name. They know if you call and try to be somebody else. They have caught tax agents impersonating their clients, and those people are no longer tax agents. Non-compliant behaviour in those sorts of respects is normally an indicator of further issues and further non-compliant behaviour. So where I think they're going to head with a lot of this data, and I've seen some of the dashboarding they're actually doing, but it's around getting a view of a taxpayer and what's your risk to the economy of non-compliance. So are you receiving Medicare because you're a doctor but not paying income tax? So if you're receiving something from the government, how are you paying your fair share? So a lot of the initiatives at the moment are about collecting the data, and very quickly we're going to start to then move to, righto, what story does that tell, and how do we wind up with a better outcome for the Australian taxpayer? John Dardo, the Chief Digital Officer, actually says it very well. It's not about catching people doing the wrong thing. It's not about cracking down. It's about ensuring the right people are paying the right tax at the right time. So they're not looking for the dollars out here and there. And when you see some of their case studies that are in the public domain, we're talking big amounts over long periods.
And keeping with the AI theme, I've had a question come through about using AI to implement cryptocurrency payments, and whether it could make it more feasible using softwares for exchange rates, tax and super requirements, etc. And are accountants ready for action in the cryptocurrency space at all? Is anyone active there? What happens when someone brings a cryptocurrency question to an accountant? Do they panic and call someone in another office, or what?
I'm from Tassie. What's cryptocurrency?
I've actually had the question. I've actually got a client who has it. And as I keep trying to remind him, it's not like a national bank or an economy with his cash backing it. And because I'm trying to give him a common sense answer, he won't talk to me about it anymore.
Has Xero considered that at any point, Rebecca?
Look, at this stage, it's probably more widely used in the consumer-to-consumer market, and so therefore it really hasn't hit the business market as much as we've seen it. We do have actually some advisors, one in Sydney and one in Canberra, who accept cryptocurrency for their accounting and bookkeeping services. So I'll have to have a chat with them as to how they're dealing with it.
No, that's good. And I think for the questioner, Brendan, if you need a new accountant, maybe Rebecca can refer you to one of those using cryptocurrency. Another question, in your experience, have you seen customers consuming AI accounting, and what's your advice to a business that wants to go down this path?
A lot of them aren't at the point of the AI piece yet because they haven't got their data standardised. And I'm talking here that those that are at the non-audit end don't have necessarily that sophistication around even standard chart of accounts, policies and procedures. We're literally off the back of the ASIC piece looking at doing an AI piece with a franchise group where at least I know the transaction patterns should be the same. So through those patterns then being able to review across files to see if they've been applied properly. But you need a couple of hundred franchisees to make that even worth the experiment. I think as the ATO pushes us towards standardising the data more, there'll be more opportunities, but we're a long way from that.
And we talked at the start about the relationship of the accountant changing and moving away from data entry, payment processing, BAS, PIG, and more towards advising. I think this question is very relevant to that. What are students going to learn at accounting courses now or going forward if they're not learning those things? What are the key subjects going to be? What skills are they going to learn?
I think it's more around analytics, understanding data, understanding what makes up a subset of data, and I think there's also needs to be a greater focus on the soft skills in relationships. How to hold conversations, how to manage relationships with clients, and how to interpret that data that they're now getting.
And I think it's moving away from traditional debits and credits. Mind your question, sometimes how much they get taught of that as well, but that's just me being a skeptic. And things like, cash flow. Cash flow is the number one killer in business. Yet I don't know a single uni course that actually spends any significant amount of time on it and a significant amount of time on different ways you can manage cash flow in different businesses.
Yeah, I think it's a big one. I think moving back to break even and actually looking at price, sales, volume, really, really simple metrics and ratios that just aren't touched on. One, because you don't have the practical application when you come out of university like I did. I learnt on a fairly archaic system, but at least we did debits and credits in a journal book. We understood where it came from, where it went to, and why. It's actually articulating the why, the soft skills, plus almost having that, I said it before, but that creative flair to cut through the general accountant questions and the general accountant statements. It's about how do you cut through and be a bit more creative, ask questions, use text messages to communicate, have conversations outside of the norm. I think that's really important for accountants and students to learn coming through accounting.
I'd like to the theme of this conference is workforce success, and we're coming to the end of our time. So I'd like to just get a few thoughts from you on, accounting's often very granular, although we've talked about the advice that can be provided. What is the positive influence that good accounting can have on the workforce and making the workforce successful?
I mean, at one extreme, I go back to that example where I was working for the bank. The difference was between the business being there and not being there. It can be as fundamental as that. Good decisions and bad decisions. If you've worked across multiple businesses, you'll know businesses where people have made good decisions with good information. And unfortunately, we see it every day where people are making decisions with no information or bad decisions with bad information. And as accountants, we've got to start to take some pride in what we do. We've got to start to look for where we can add value, not just fill in the forms at the end of the month. And personally, I'm having a lot of fun agitating through our practice at the moment around what are we doing differently this month to what we did last month to start to protect against things like that compliance base changing over time.
How does that flow down to the end employee? How do they feel that?
They're actually hands-on. I tend to find they're actually far more receptive than some of the senior guys. Just, they're keen to learn. They're keen to get engaged. They're keen to get into that data and see what they can learn out of it. Come into your office and bounce it off you. They actually want to add value in their careers. They don't want to be there filling out tax returns.
Yeah, I think you're right. That no one wants to be sitting there filling out forms. At least those junior ones that are keen to get into the workforce and prove themselves. And that's what this enables, is that we can lift them up to a higher level quicker, working on that information.
I really enjoyed Tasman's story this morning about where did you start and how that has, changed the way you...
Where did you start, Rebecca?
Where did I start? I started in my family's small business, which is a bookkeeping accounting firm. But I think it was at that time we were hiring another person, and they were a few years older than me, and they kept saying, but the boss takes all the income. And that's a really common thing in accounting, that we're not actually articulating, no, all the revenue that comes into this business isn't mine, because I need to take out your wages and salaries, the cost of getting the produce or whatever it may be back out. So I think a big thing that all of us should be trying to do is educate the workforce employees to better understand where profit drivers come from and building KPIs and sales back to those things. Yep.
We've got 30 seconds left. Just quickly, Anthony, where did you start?
In a Toyota dealership in Devonport in the mid-90s. Toyota Corolla was $27,000 back in 1994, and they were pretty hard to sell. Not that I was selling them.
Coopers and Lybrand, actually in forensic accounting, litigation support.
That was your first job?
So I spent my first 2 years seeing everything not to do from an accounting perspective. So it's been a great grounding.
Okay, and my first job was at McDonald's as a burger flipper. And contrary to other people, I actually really enjoyed my time at McDonald's. So I think other people are doing it wrong. Look, it's great to have leaders in the industry here like Rebecca, Anthony and Jason. So please join with me in thanking them for their participation today.